I think just about everyone, Christians and non-Christians, have heard of the conversion story of Saul on the road to Damascus, how he became a former enemy of Christianity, became a Christian. This is in Acts chapter 9. But what some Christians may not realise, including myself at one time, is that Paul gives his own account of this in Galatians, and it's a little bit different to the account in Acts. So what I've attempted to do, I've had a look at the way that Christian apologists explain this contradiction or apparent contradiction, how they try to harmonize the two accounts from Acts and Galatians. And I've drawn up two timelines which show key events and how they relate to each other from Acts and Galatians, and look at the ways that Bible commentators, Christian apologists try to harmonize these. Now, there's an apparent contradiction. I believe personally it's a contradiction because they're not historical accounts, but that's just my opinion. But there is a contradiction there because right from the outset, in Acts, we have the conversion of Saul when he sees a flashing light and a spirit figure who identifies himself as Jesus speaks to Saul. His friends don't hear or don't understand what's going on. They just run away in fear, but Saul understands, and as a result of this appearance or this vision he has, he's blinded. So his friends have to lead him by the hand into Damascus, where he was traveling to. And for 3 days and 3 nights, he's blinded and he doesn't eat or drink anything. So he's laid up, he's obviously very badly affected by this experience. And after that, Jesus appears to Ananias and gives him word to go to Saul, help him recover his sight miraculously. He gets baptized on the spot and he eats a meal with them. And obviously, while he's having a meal, there would have been, plenty of conversation surrounding what had just happened. And so would have been an interesting time. And then it says in the account that for some days, so it doesn't specify how long that is. So it must be a considerable length of time. He spends time with the disciples in Damascus. So after spending some days with the disciples there, it says Saul immediately preaches in the synagogues, confounding the Jews in Damascus. And this went on for many days. And again, we don't really know how long many days is. It could be a few years, as we'll see later in the video, comparing it to Galatians. So he's preaching there in Damascus to the Jews in Damascus for some time, confounding them, preaching about Jesus. And then after many days, the Jews, I suppose they're sick of being confounded by this man, so they want to kill him. So the disciples send him to Jerusalem. And when he gets to Jerusalem, Saul attempts to join himself to the brothers in Jerusalem, but they flee from him because they've heard that he's a persecutor. They don't know about his conversion. But Barnabas helps him out and he brings him to the apostles, it says in this account. So Paul or Saul is brought to the apostles, and so he stays in Jerusalem for a while preaching. In fact, in Acts 9, 28 and 29, it says that Saul went in and out among them. So he would have became quite well known among the brothers in Jerusalem and among the Jews he was preaching to there. He was preaching to the Hellenistic Jews, and they got sick of him, so they were seeking to kill him. When the brothers in Jerusalem found this out, they sent Saul to Tarsus for his protection. So that's how the account goes in the rough timeline in Acts. But if we have a look in Galatians, we get a very different idea about his conversion, because in Acts there were other people involved. Jesus communicated with Saul. Jesus communicated with Ananias. Ananias assisted Paul, baptized him. Saul had a meal with them, spent time with them. It was the same when he went to Jerusalem. He spent time with the disciples. So obviously there would have been an exchange of ideas and beliefs there among the people and Saul. But in Galatians, Paul, who all experts agree, Bible experts agree that Galatians was most likely written by Paul. So Paul writes his own account here, which is quite different. And he's making the point in Galatians 1:16, I think it is. He says, "I did not immediately consult with anyone, nor did I go up to Jerusalem." So this is after the Son was revealed to Saul. So I always assumed that this God revealing his Son to Saul was the same as Saul's conversion on the road to Damascus. But the problem with that is then there's a direct contradiction, because whereas Saul was led by the hand by his companions, spent 3 days and 3 nights with them, laid up, he couldn't go anywhere. Then he spent time with Ananias after he was recovered, had his sight recovered, baptized, and ate a meal with them and spent some days with them. And then he's going, preaching among the disciples in Damascus. But in Galatians, it says that after God revealed his Son, he didn't immediately consult with anyone. So there's a contradiction there, because in Acts he's having dealings with people, obviously consulting with them. And in Galatians, he's not consulting with anyone. And then after the Son had been revealed, he did not immediately consult with anyone. He went away into Arabia and then returned to Damascus. So because of this problem, a lot of Bible commentators, what they do, they differentiate between God revealing the Son to Saul and his conversion, and they say that they're different anyway, because the conversion involved other people and it was more of an external conversion of an enemy of God. But in Galatians, it's more of an internal realization or a revealing to Paul's mind and heart. So it's quite different. So some commentators place this immediately after the some days. So in this way they harmonize it. So Saul was converted, and then after a time somehow the Son was revealed to him in a special significant way, and then he went on to preach to the Jews in Damascus for many days about the Christ, this newfound belief that he had. So this is why the question marks are here. So if we move that event to hear and say that that's a different event to his conversion, then we're able to avoid a contradiction. This is what many Bible commentators do. Now, after this some days, and God revealing his Son to him, he preaches among the brothers in Damascus for many days. Well, in Galatians, it says that he went away into Arabia. It doesn't say how long, so this may have just been a brief period of time. Perhaps after everything that went on, he needed some time to meditate. And it's thought that the region of Arabia is perhaps where the mountain of God is, perhaps in around towards Midian where Moses was when he encountered God. So Paul perhaps trying to make a spiritual connection there with himself to Moses. And yeah, so that's an interesting side point. But so he briefly goes into Arabia, then returns to Damascus. So he's preaching he's there for 3 years. So this, if we equate this to the many days, which we can't be 100% sure that the many days is the 3 years, but we've got no choice. If you want to harmonize these accounts, we have to equate the many days with 3 years, because what happened at the end of these 3 years is that Saul went to Jerusalem. So whereas in Acts we find that after preaching and confounding the Jews in Damascus, and they wanted to kill him, so Saul was sent to Jerusalem. Well, in this case, it doesn't mention that. It just says after 3 years, Saul went to Jerusalem. So that's not a contradiction. It's just, an omission of some detail is not necessarily a contradiction. So let's just give the writers and the accounts there the benefit of the doubt and just say that the many days was 3 years. So that matches up. That's all very good. So then in Acts, when he goes to Jerusalem, he spends some time in Jerusalem preaching, enough time for the Jews in Jerusalem to get sick of him. But in the account in Galatians, it says after the 3 years, Saul went to Jerusalem to visit Cephas, and it gives the time period for that in Galatians 1:18-20. It says that he visited Cephas for 15 days. So then we have to equate, to make these harmonize, the preaching in Jerusalem before the brothers had to send him away from there to Tarsus with 15 days. So, the Jews in Jerusalem got sick of him a lot quicker, didn't they? So stayed with Cephas 15 days, and then it says the very next thing, he went to preach in Syria and Cilicia, which is where around where Tarsus is, which is modern day Cilicia is modern day Turkey. So he went up into that region, and in Galatians it keeps going into chapter 2. Just one interesting point before we get there, though. So a lot of the commentators, they'll harmonize these points all the way along, like I've done. And, it seems to harmonize it, but there's still details that I haven't seen anyone able to harmonize yet. There may be an explanation that I've missed in my research, but it's just interesting here that in Galatians 1:21-24, it says, then Saul went to preach in Syria and Cilicia, and this is a quote, it says, and I was still unknown in person to the churches of Judea. Now, that strikes me as odd, because all along in the account, like if we go into Acts and just go back here, it says that, Saul attempts to join the Jerusalem disciples. They're afraid of him. Barnabas assists him and brings him to the apostles. It doesn't specify that that was only Cephas. It just says the apostles. It doesn't mention James, the brother of Jesus, either, that it mentioned in Galatians. Okay, so he's brought to the apostles, and it says in 9:28 and 29 that Saul went in and out among them, preaching to the Hellenistic Jews. So Saul's in Jerusalem, being brought to the apostles. So obviously the apostles would have reassured the brothers, hey, he's one of us. And he's going in and out and preaching among them. So he would have been quite well known among the brothers there. And yet in Galatians, it says, so after he'd been in Jerusalem, then he went to Syria and Cilicia, and says, and I was still unknown in person to the churches of Judea. In fact, it goes on to say in Galatians that the brothers in Judea, while Paul was in Cilicia, they would just hear reports about his preaching, but they didn't know him. This is at odds with Acts. So even though the whole accounts have been harmonized all the way along, this detail still doesn't match up. And then in Galatians, it goes on to chapter 2 that he was preaching, it appears from this account, in Syria and Cilicia for 14 years before he went back to Jerusalem, and this was because of a revelation. So we've had a look at those two accounts. Now, we can see what I've attempted to show is that how Christians have tried to harmonize these, because obviously Christians, they don't want contradictions in the Bible, especially some fundamentalist Christians today who believe in scriptural inerrancy. But you can harmonize it to an extent, but you can't harmonize everything. And a lot of the commentaries just gloss over this. They don't keep going with this, obviously, because you don't pick up all these points. And I've only picked these up in the last few days. I'm sure if I looked at more and did more research, I'd pick up even more finer points which are at odds. But to me, the correct way to look at this, as I've looked with the Gospels and other things before, is that these are separate accounts written by separate writers, obviously, and everyone agrees with this. The traditional viewpoint is that Acts was written by Luke. Not all scholars agree with that. Scholars, by and large, agree that Paul wrote Galatians. So we have these two letters which are at odds, and they're just presenting different theological viewpoints. We see in Acts that, we'll look at Galatians first. When we look at Galatians and what Paul wrote, we see that Paul was converted. It was almost like an inner religious experience, nothing external about it. And he stresses that there was no consultation with any human. And in fact, he says in other parts of Galatians that everything that he was preaching was revealed to him by revelation from Jesus. So his gospel, the point he's trying to make, is not from human origin. It had nothing to do with humans, not passed on by any humans, but it's all divine origin from the glorified Jesus Christ. Whereas the writer in Acts and I've read this in certain commentaries as well. It's almost as if they're trying to bring Paul down a peg or two. They're showing that this is a conversion, an external conversion of Saul by Jesus, and Saul is then reliant on other humans, even communing with them, having a meal with them, being healed by Ananias. Jesus has to communicate with another human to do this, to lead Ananias to Saul. Then Saul is going in and out, preaching with the brothers, spending time with them, even before he went to Arabia. So the same thing in Jerusalem, he attempts to join himself to the apostles. Barnabas helps him. The apostles, he meets them, and then he's going in and out preaching. So there's human involvement, obviously exchange of ideas, consultation with other humans. And this brings Paul down a notch, whereas in Galatians it's all by direct revelation from Jesus. So it was quite interesting to look at this. And, you know, from my viewpoint, I'm an atheist now, but I tried to give the commentators a benefit of the doubt, give the scriptures a benefit of the doubt as well, and harmonize it as much as possible. But it was an interesting exercise to go through, but it just shows that the contradictions are, scattered all the way through it, and it's impossible to harmonize everything. And there's a lot of debate among scholars over this as well. There has been for a long time. So, yeah, where there's smoke, there's fire, I suppose. But that's the video that I wanted to make about something interesting that I've learned about Paul's conversion story. I didn't look at the details elsewhere in Acts, in other chapters where Paul mentions this as well. I think you'll find that there's extra dialogue between him and Jesus, and Ananias and Jesus, and extra details added to the account there. So when Paul retells it. But I hope you enjoyed this video. This channel is one for Azazel, and if you enjoyed the video, please leave a comment, like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.